Okay, so good evening, everybody. My name is Ceri Owen, and I'm going to be talking to you today about decommissioning. Okay, a couple of objectives for my talk today. Mainly, I just want to talk to you about all the different stages of decommissioning. The IAEA described 5 stages of decommissioning, and that's the same thing that AWE have adopted, and I suspect some of the other sites have also adopted the same thing. So we'll have a look at what those consist of and think about some of the activities that go on there and the different sorts of environments that people are asked to work in. We'll then go on and have a look at some of the difficulties that people have during decommissioning. I've got some examples for you, again, from the IAEA. Then we'll go on to have a look at the safety case. I'm a safety case author, so it would be wrong of me not to include something on safety case work. But it will be brief, and I hope not to bore you too much with that bit. And then we'll go on to think about some of the ideas that I have on how we can improve decommissioning. Okay, so here are the 5 stages of decommissioning. We've got transition. At AWE, just to be a little bit different, we call it POCO, which stands for Operational Clean-Out. This is such an important part of the decommissioning process. This is the first part and the first chance that we have as a licensee to make the earliest possible hazard reduction. Transition, unlike all the other phases here, is ideally carried out by the personnel that have been working in the facility while it's been operating. The sorts of things that you would do during this transition phase is, I don't know, some sort of decontamination. You might have the opportunity to remove some of the hazards or remove some of the equipment that's not going to be needed later on during dismantling. If you're a nuclear reactor, removing fuel from your core could also be another activity that you do during this transition phase. But I've just said that transition is done by the personnel who were working in the operational facility. These people, whilst this facility was operating, had secure employment. They knew what was going on. They were part of creating something. They were there to do what that facility was there to do. And when operations cease and you move into this transition period, they know that very soon they could possibly be out of a job. There may be the opportunity to move them on to work somewhere else on site, like AWE. We've got a lot of facilities there. But if you're a reactor site, maybe that's it. Maybe that means moving long distances and relocating and working somewhere else. So that must be incredibly difficult. And I'm suggesting maybe that change in environment could affect morale. The reason that you keep the operating personnel doing this is because the sorts of activities that you do during transition will be covered by the operational safety case. So you're doing the sorts of thing in transition that you would actually do during operations, because good housekeeping makes good sense during operations. The second stage of decommissioning is care and surveillance. Again, a really challenging environment. After you finish transition, or POCO, everybody leaves and goes off and has a new job somewhere else. And care and surveillance is about maintaining that facility in a safe state and also maintaining bits of equipment that you might need later on. I don't know, maybe during dismantling. I think the easiest thing that I can think of is probably an overhead crane. Need an overhead crane during operations, you're probably going to need that when you're dismantling, so moving bits around. So it makes sense to sort of maintain that during this care and surveillance period so you're able to use it later on. But again, think about the maintainers who are having to go in and do this activity. They're entering into a facility where there are no other people. They're entering into a facility that's probably not been used for a couple of years because care and surveillance, well, that could last a few years or maybe even a couple of decades. So they're going into a facility that they know isn't going to be used, and maybe isn't going to be used for many years into the future. So how is that going to sort of affect their morale in terms of the importance and the value that they see that their work in maintaining this kit is going to have? Dismantling, third stage of decommissioning, really, as it says on the tin, is about dismantling, size reduction, decontamination, getting rid of all the stuff in your facility, good waste management. Probably really the thing that people think of when they think about decommissioning. Maybe you've got people in pressurised breathing suits. I've got a photo of that in the bottom corner. Really challenging environment, but I think when I talk to people about decommissioning, that's a bit that they think it's all about. So now you've got rid of all your hazards within the facility, and you move into the full stage of care of decommissioning, which is care and maintenance. I always think that sort of stage 2 and stage 4 should be the other way around, because you're now going into, ideally, an empty building and looking after the structure, the building, keeping that in a safe state. You've got ageing effects. So again, maintainers going in and looking after the facility and keeping it safe until the licensee is ready to start demolition. We've got the cooling towers picture here down the bottom, which probably most of us are all familiar with, which takes us to the last stage of decommissioning. I have a really nice graph here that I've plagiarised from one of the IAEA tech docs. Some people like it, some people dislike it. The thing that I would like you to take away from this graph is this period here in red, which is transition. You really do have the earliest opportunity, if it's done well, to get early hazard reduction here. And the people that are going to benefit from that are all the way through the remaining stages of decommissioning. Not only are you making the facility safer, but almost certainly, because you're reducing the risks here, you're going to be reducing the costs of contracts that you put out for later dismantling. So there really is a huge cost incentive, not only a safety incentive, if that wasn't enough. It's a really nice picture. The reason some people might not like this graph is this care and surveillance sort of stage here. And I've drawn that as a straight line. The eagle-eyed amongst you might want to argue with that. If you were a reactor site, you would probably expect that the radiological hazard there might sort of fall off because you're benefiting from radioactive decay. A plutonium-contaminated site like AWE, that could actually increase. Because as your plutonium is aging, you'll get americium ingrowth, which, unlike plutonium, which is an alpha emitter, is a gamma emitter. So you could argue that that would increase slightly. So I've taken it upon myself to average those out and just stick a straight line in there. So I've spoken to you about some of the challenges that these people face in these different stages of decommissioning. And we've got some evidence to suggest that the impact of these challenging environments is really felt later on. The Jason reactor here, which was based in the UK, they had some problems with unexpected tritium. None of the records that they had at the time indicated that tritium should be in this area. By the time that they'd come to dismantle, all of the operators who were involved in the operational phase, they'd all gone. They'd taken that knowledge with them. They uncovered tritium. They don't know why it's there, how it happened, how much of it there was. And obviously that's going to have, people have been working in this area thinking that it was clean, but actually there's tritium. So there's a big safety problem there. But also the contractors were able to slap a change note on the table and say, wow, you didn't tell us about this. This is going to cost you quite a bit more money. Fortunately, the project team actually found I think it was the deputy facility manager, and sort of, he actually retired, but they were able to go and talk to him, and he said, oh yes, I remember what that was about, and and they sort of paid for his services as a consultant to sort of understand what hadn't been written down and fill in some of the gaps in the records. This is a second example, is a reactor in Korea. Again, the records weren't kept up to date. It caused problems. They weren't able to estimate the sorts of activity levels that they needed to in order to safely dismantle, and they had to look elsewhere. I think in the end they used a similar reactor that was actually based in the UK, believe it or not, and used their records in order to sort of estimate what was going on with theirs in order to be able to plan and do the decommissioning. And again, another reactor in Slovakia, they hadn't bothered with transition. The reactor closed and all the people went away. They took with them all that valuable knowledge, and the facility was aging, which caused problems that really didn't need to happen had they acted sooner. So we can see that it does seem to be quite difficult doing this transition period well. As I've said, there's a safety impact here. So why don't people like me capture that in a safety case? Well, in a nutshell, this is my view of what a safety case does. Identifies all your hazards, you get a nice fault schedule. What's your worst case accident? How bad is this thing that we're going to be doing? Put some safeguards in and mitigation, and depending on how bad the consequences are, if that fault is realised, you might want to throw a bit more money at that safeguard. Make sure that they're going to do what they need to do when they need to do it. And finally, this is a definition of a LARP that I was given by a retired regulator. So, hand on heart, have you really done everything you need to do? So this is what the safety case is doing. I don't know if many of you have seen a safety case, but it's really built on your fault schedule. So you'd have an initiating event, I don't know, your sling drops or your sling breaks on a crane and a container smashes to the floor, spilling radioactive material, and you get a release to the environment, and maybe someone is wounded and gets some contaminated wound. And the way that your fault schedule is all sort of set up, it's really about what's happening there and then. And that seems to be the focus. We do human factors. We know that people make mistakes, and that is also included in the safety case. But it's really about those one-off events that accidents happen, and not necessarily the impact of an environment and the impact that that has on the whole team of people working in there. So maybe one of the reasons that we aren't doing everything we can is because the focus of the safety case isn't on this. But maybe as sort of responsible licensees, this could be an area that we should be looking at. I came across resilience engineering. Now, I think they're looking at this in air traffic management. And that's looking at sort of system variations and the things that influence behaviours. And if we understand the impact of things, be that an environment or regulation on people's attitudes and behaviours, then we can maybe do something about it sooner rather than later. So perhaps resilience engineering could be a way of bridging the gap between what the safety case does and this extra thing that we as licensees might be able to do in order to make decommissioning even safer. So, to summarise, decommissioning is desperately interesting. It's so varied, all the different stages are so different to each other, and there's so much going on in the dismantling phase, and those differences and variations make it make it quite challenging in order to ensure that we are being as safe as we could possibly be. We really should be managing the impact of these environments, these really challenging environments, on the people that we ask to work in there. It's wrong of us to expect that working in these sorts of facilities where there's that threat of maybe imminent unemployment or going into a facility that you know isn't going to be used, it's wrong of us to think that this has no effect on the performance of people here. So I think personally this is something that we should in the industry be looking at. And that concludes my talk. Any questions?